Welcome to Swing Left Nebraska. We are the regional chapter of Swing Left, 100% run by grassroots volunteers dedicated to fighting for a more equitable, inclusive, and prosperous Nebraska and motivating Democratic-leaning voters to vote. When we don't vote, when we don't get engaged, get involved, or stand up for what we believe in, we're effectively giving up our power. Action is the antidote. When we collaborate, work together, support each other, and our shared values, we can make our voices heard, make an impact, and inspire others to join the fight. Swing Left Nebraska offers you the information, actionable ideas, and tools you need to advocate for progressive legislation and to help elect Democratic candidates who will fight for the common good for all Nebraskans. Let's mobilize, let's take action, let's go. Hello, my name is Leah. I'm a volunteer with Swing Left and your host for today. We have an awesome jam-packed episode. Angie and I bring you up to date on the anti-abortion bill 626 and LB574, the anti-trans bill. Discuss the voter suppression bills LB228 and LB230. An LB575, which would limit the harm additional voter identification requirements will have on our state elections. We also chat about how Christian nationalism has found its way into the legislature. You will hear directly from some of the senators on this topic. Finally, spoke about LB811 relating to the Student Discipline Act and provide for the use of physical contact or physical restraint. So yeah, lots going on. Let's do a show. Angie, we have a lot going on right now. It is hard to keep track. So let's just start with, where are we right now in the session?
All righty. So currently we are still doing floor debates in the morning and then holding public hearings in the afternoon. The morning floor debates have been really interesting. The committee did move forward this week, LB626, which is the abortion ban, and LB574, which is the anti-trans legislation that they're calling the Let Them Grow Act. I hate calling it that because that makes it sound like it's a good thing. And it's clearly not, because it's not about letting them grow. It's about preventing trans youth from getting the medical care that they need. And two pieces of legislation were advanced out of committee, and they will move on to general file, which means that they're now in line to be scheduled on the agenda to be debated by the entire floor. And Senator Kauth has also listed LB574 as a priority bill, which means that it gets bumped up on the agenda. We're waiting for Speaker Arch to go ahead and schedule all of those. The frustrating part is we never know about what's on the floor agenda until pretty much the evening before. So we don't have a whole lot of time to prepare for what might be debated that next day, other than we know for sure the priority bills that we're concerned about that are waiting to be placed on the agenda is Senator Brewer's LB77, which is the constitutional carry that we've talked about that we oppose, and then LB626 now, the abortion ban, LB574, which is the anti-trans legislation, and then the 754, which is the voucher bill towards public schools. They're going to start debating priority bills next week, so we're going to want to start really watching floor debates and those agendas to see when those will be debated on. Right now, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh is being an amazing shero for women and femmes and trans youth in the state of Nebraska. And she is just up there fighting tooth and nail. She's working to slow down and delay the process as much as she can in an attempt to try and prevent these harmful legislation from seeing floor debate. It's hard to put into terms all of the people that she's defending right now. Pretty much every Nebraskan. She is really out there fighting for every Nebraskan's rights right now.
She's fighting for everybody's rights. And some of the things that really stood out to me watching her on the floor was when she talked about how, in addition for fighting for choice in Nebraska, she's behind a lot of bills that would help children get access to food. And what she said is, what a progressive thing that I could do, that I'm fighting so that every child can have food in their belly. But instead, so much time is being dedicated to having to stand up and fight for rights for Nebraskans, that time is being taken away from these bills that could actually help Nebraskans. Yes, got to give her a shout out. Megan Hunt also did some great advocating for all Nebraskans as well. She's a big proponent in making sure that every Nebraskan's voice is heard. And she talked on the floor about her concerns about not every Nebraskan getting a chance to express themselves over concerns over these bills as well. What can we expect going into this next week?
So they're not in session on Monday. The session will start back up on Tuesday, and we'll want to start watching for those priority bills. We'll want to look at the agenda the nights before, so that way we can know what's coming up. But obviously we need to be ready to fight for some of that. Finally, I know we've been talking for a little while about how there is some pro-LGBTQ and pro-reproductive rights bills out there that have been introduced by Senator Hunt, Senator Frederickson, but they just haven't been scheduled for public hearings yet. So those have finally been scheduled for public hearing. And one of the things that I want to point out that is interesting, I don't know if that's the right word, but definitely frustrating, is there's me and other organizers that assist with the study group, and all of us are constantly looking out for this legislation and these bills. And so we noticed this week that the pro-LGBTQ legislation has finally been scheduled. We've got quite a bit of it in judiciary on March 1st. That'll be room 1113 at 1:30. There's the LR26CA, which is the constitutional amendment regarding marriage. So to constitutionalize the famous term gay marriage. And then we have LB169, which prohibits discrimination based upon sexual orientation and gender identity. We have LB316, which will change and eliminate provisions relating to marriage. So the constitutional amendment would change it in Nebraska's constitution, make it more permanent. And then LB316 isn't a constitutional change, it's legislation. So just a little bit different there. And then LB331 is provide for adoption by two persons jointly. So that has to do with LGBTQ folks being able to adopt and stuff. So we've got some good legislation coming in there. We also have the first in Health and Human Services Committee. We have the bill to prohibit conversion therapy. That's LB179. And then LB488 is Adopt the Sexual Assault Emergency Care Act, which we're supporters of that. And that's been introduced by Senator Hunt. Yeah, so we're starting to go through some of these that are finally being scheduled. On the 3rd, we have the constitutional amendment to protect reproductive rights, as well as the constitutional amendment that would protect people, that assist people in getting reproductive rights. So we've been going through a lot and figuring out the schedule hearings, and they'll be on the same day, but one's in Health and Human Services and one's in Judiciary. And so that can make it hard because people hearings. And so our study group organizers have been paying quite a bit of attention on this and going through this along with some of the other bills that we've been following. So this morning when I talked to you, we realized that we missed some important voter ID bills because we had been all consumed with these ones. I appreciate it. You were following through on the voter ID, and I think it really speaks to just how hard it can be to really follow and track some of this legislation in these public hearings.
Yeah, and like we were saying, we're like, this doesn't seem like a coincidence that this is so challenging to follow, even with multiple people looking at all the bills, every free moment you guys have dissecting, looking at them, educating the community about them. It still happened that you missed some important voter ID bills that came up. So this is just a test to how this process can be confusing and the importance of coming together as a community, as a unified force to learn and educate each other so that we can be a more powerful entity, really. Unfortunately, the passage of the ballot initiative 432 now means that Nebraska legislator is required to consider 3 different proposals to implement additional layers of voter identification. In Nebraska, these additional voter identification requirements risk eliminating ballot access for between 54,000 and 70,000 Nebraskans. In the past two election cycles, more than 1.3 million Nebraskans casted their ballots early, and nearly 150,000 of those came from rural counties that employ all vote by mail systems. LB228 and LB230 were introduced by Senator Steve Erdeman of Bayard, are the first of several expected voter ID bills in this session. So together, these bills would all eliminate vote by mail, sharply raise requirements to register, and create new criminal punishment for both voters and election workers who unintentionally not comply with the reams of additional restrictions and requirements. Most significantly, LB230 would compel nearly all Nebraskans to vote in person. It would abolish the state's no excuse absentee voting and also would limit mail voting to military personnel and disabled citizens who qualify. Now, currently, first-time Nebraskan voters can submit several forms of ID to register. They include a copy of utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, and other current government documents that is current and shows the name and address of the applicant as they appear in the application. LB230 would do away with these options, which would likely harm younger and lower income voters from registering and make it nearly impossible. And while disabled Nebraskans would still be allowed to vote by mail, they would be required to swear an oath that their condition prevents them from casting an in-person ballot. In addition, they would be required to submit a color photocopy of a qualifying identification each and every time they request and submit a mail-in ballot. So the legislation does not make provisions for free state-issued IDs, but only in limited cases, meaning most Nebraskans would still be required to pay a fee to attain the identification necessary to exercise their right to vote. This is huge. You have a vote should be aware of that we need to support, and that's LB675, and that was introduced by Senator Day, and that would limit the harm of additional voter identification requirements that would have on the state elections. Specifically, it allows more inclusive forms of identification, such as standard driver's license, student ID cards, and employment IDs, to be used prior to receiving a ballot. Additionally, the bill creates and funds a public awareness campaign that explains to voters how to protect their ballots, access, and delays implementation of the voter ID requirements until 2026. This bill, LB675, defines qualifying identification to include driver's license, learner's permits, state ID cards, school-issued student ID, these military identification cards, tribal ID cards, and other lawful forms of identification commonly used in other states. Nebraska voters who do not have one of the qualifying forms of ID could sign a declaration attesting to their identity and acknowledging the penalty. So we really need to be paying attention to both these. We want to oppose LB535 and LB230 because they are the most restrictive proposals, as they narrowly define what qualifies as a valid photo ID and fails to communicate to Nebraska voters how these rules would be implemented. And in the case of LB230, would actually require individuals' driver's license to carry a mark indicating whether or not they are a United States citizen. And we want to support Jen Day's bill, LB675, which would limit the harm additional voter identification requirements will have on state elections.
I want to add something. While the voters did, unfortunately, vote for voter identification to happen, I do want to point out that does not mean that they have to pass it this session. Ideally, we would like for them to enact initiatives that were voted on by the public as quickly as possible. But at the same time, we want to make sure that they get it right. They want to make this superficial timeline rush on, oh, the voters voted for this, we got to get it enacted. I don't believe that you can enact voter ID laws in a non-harmful way, but we can at least work to make sure that it's enacted in the least harmful way possible, and that we have protections like what Senator Day's bill is trying to do built in to this legislation. As a reminder, the voters of Nebraska also voted for Medicaid expansion, and I believe it took us, 4 years to get
Right.
after our vote. The rush on this is superficial. They should take their time and make sure that if we're doing this, we're doing it in a way that is really thoughtful in ensuring that it's not oppressing the vote. And again, I say that with hesitation because I understand there's no way we can eliminate all of the problems, but we can do our best to eliminate what we can. When I testified on voter ID earlier this year, I simply told them that they shouldn't enact it. We want them to enact stuff that voters vote for because of precedent, but at the same time, this is not the majority. The Republican majority in charge right now is not a party that follows precedent. We know this by the way that they've overturned and are okay with overturning Roe v. Wade. And there's lots of things that they sit on. They don't do anything for reasonable gun laws, which the public wants. They don't do anything to fully fund public schools, which the public wants. So they're putting a very artificial, we have to hurry and push this through, and on there's no.
Yeah.
That they can take their time, and if it doesn't get done this year, we can do it next year, or just however long it takes to make sure that it's done in a way that we're not really harming a lot of people.
And LB675, introduced by Day, would like to see the delay of implementation of the voter ID requirement until 2026. Now, this is a snarky idea, but I think if we were so lucky that LB675 does pass and there is an awareness campaign that happens that explains to voters how to protect their ballot access, I also think to be included is the name of the Senator Erdeman, who introduced it, so that when people are going out of their way to be able to vote by mail, when they're jumping through all the hoops, they know why and who did it. That's just me, though.
No, I definitely think that. In fact, I think everything that gets passed, I complain all the time about having grown up in Western Nebraska. My whole life, I heard that it was these politicians in Lincoln that are stopping everything. It's those urban liberals that are stopping us from being able to ensure that rural Nebraska can grow and be revitalized in the way that it needs to be. And now that I'm following the legislature, I'm like, what are you talking about? You guys are the majority. And now they're a clear majority. We don't even have a filibuster. So they can push through and pass pretty much whatever they want to. And the best that we can do is fight tooth and nail to try and stall some of this so that we can prevent what we can. And so as voter ID passes, if the abortion ban passes, if we're unable to ward off the anti-trans legislation, all of these things that are going to make doctors move away when we are already struggling to get doctors, that are going to make teachers move away when we are already struggling to get teachers, that are just going to have families and businesses in general either not want to be here or leave the state. I know last year, helping out with Cindy Maxwell Osdick's campaign over in West Omaha, that they love their mail-in voting. So when they can't do their mail-in voting, let them know, hey, this was brought to you by the majority party, the GOP. You cannot place the blame on a party that can't even filibuster.
Yeah.
And so as this legislation goes out, I really hope that we can get the word out that this is all brought to you by the extreme wing of the Nebraska GOP.
Especially to the 11 counties that are only vote by mail. And I believe those all rural counties, correct?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Or going up in Grant, Nebraska is where I grew up. When I needed to go to the DMV, you would either have to drive in that area to the closest town that had it, or to go get my driver's license. Even had to go into Ogallala, and they would only have the person to do driver's license there on certain days from certain times. It's not like in even the city of Omaha where you drive across town and there's always going to be during business hours somewhere you can get your DMV. Like in Western Nebraska, it's not even like that. They're going to fill this. A lot of the areas that have voted these senators in are going to be impacted in negative ways by this legislation. It sometimes takes a little bit for legislation effects to be felt, but it will be felt. And when it is, I hope everybody knows that this is, I know I'm going to be out here screaming, hey, which senator did that to you? That one was Erdman. That one was Merman. That one was,
there should be a warning label at the DMV or any place where we can get eyes on these things that has a warning label like, warning, you're having to jump through all these extra hoops because of this
or
senator.
when somebody gets upset at the person, the DMV or wherever it is, that gets upset about the policies, and the DMV employee should just be able to hand them a paper that says, oh, okay, this is the person responsible for this legislation change, and this is the person that you should be complaining to, because all I'm doing is upholding that. We joke around to make light of it because it's so serious. I do think that here might be a good point to include in this conversation that a lot of the conversation that we're hearing from our heroes at the legislature, the ladies that are kind of leading the fight for progressives right now, is we all should be aware and concerned about kind of this Christian nationalism that is taking hold on the state legislature. I know that we're seeing it throughout our country, but whereas we're focusing on the state legislature right now, there has been discussion on that this week. Senator Kavanaugh actually was the one to initially bring up the conversation, but then she was joined concerns by Senator Hunt, Senator Conrad, and even Senator Blood. I know you and I, Leah, had talked about it a little bit off the record about how it was interesting to see Senator Blood say something, because she brings up her Catholic faith a lot. We all know that she's Catholic. We all know that she very much believes in a deity, but she also is really good about not forcing those beliefs onto others. So it was interesting to even see her express concern. So essentially, there is some Christian leadership. He was named on the floor. The name is Aaron Hess, and he helps lead a capital prayer study thing. And it was brought up by Senator Kavanaugh, and then again in concerns reinforced by the other senators, that a lot of state resources is going towards this effort. It sounds as though they're meeting on what you would consider business hours. So it'd be kind of like having a prayer group at work. And then I guess there's some staff sending out emails on behalf of him or this group. And obviously staff at the legislature is paid with public funds. So there was even concern brought up about how this gentleman had been given access to the upper floors. So when you go to the state legislature, in case for those that haven't been there, they have the towers. So they're like upper floors. You got to reach them by an elevator. They're older. So when you go, if there are senators that you would like to speak to that are up in the tower on, I think it's like the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th floors, then you have to call up there and staffer has to come down. There's like security stuff around it. So apparently this gentleman, this Aaron Hess, had been given kind of access to those floors that some of the senators had felt was inappropriate. They've basically brought up concerns that this is state sanctioned religion, and that state resources are being utilized. And Senator Blood even brought up that this Aaron Hess should register as a lobbyist. And to that, either Senator Birdman or Senator Merman, they were the ones being the other side of this debate, brought up that if he was there lobbying for anybody, it was Jesus. Which is the problem, right? You can believe whatever you want, and you can pray in your office if you want to. You can pray anytime you want to, but you can't use state resources. You can't have your legislative staff sending out emails for him. You can't. There's lines in the sand that need to be drawn between that in order to keep the separation of church and state. So that has been discussed and debated on a lot, not just this week, but there has been a pretty heavy focus on it earlier this week. So I think that we all need to be aware of some of the concerns. So these are women that we know and respect in the state legislature. We're familiar with them, and they're giving us these warnings.
Yeah, let's go ahead and listen to what they have to say.
It is something that is personally important to me in my own way, and I don't want to hinder anyone from having the option to have a prayer group, but it is not appropriate for us to be doing this during work time taxpayer dollars. It really is something that it may seem harmless, in and of itself, but the reality is that it's becoming very pervasive, and we shouldn't be infusing our own religion into the everyday practice of this business. So I think that this is something that we should continue talking about, and perhaps we even need to take action at the exec board level. So thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know that there's very little that we can do to change the outcome of things in this legislature. The truth is that the Republican Party, which is not really the Republican Party, it's a Christian nationalist party, plus a few wealthy donors, run most of you on this floor, control most of the people on this floor. And so Nebraskans want to look at what we do and say, okay, these are the deliberative minds that we've elected to come to Lincoln and represent us and think this way and that way about the issues and use their judgment to come up with the best answer. Oh, we're weighing things on the left, we're weighing things on the right, we're listening to the evidence and making a choice. Nebraskans, that's literally never what's going on here. Just this morning, Senator Merman gave the prayer, and I'm never on the floor for the prayer because I don't use my presence or my body in this space to validate the way you guys are corrupting a space that is supposed to be democratic, that's supposed to welcome everybody. And then you use that to support your Christian nationalist view of politics, of the world, and that's the way it comes down every single morning. But even Senator Merman this morning invoked the name Jesus Christ, which is obviously making it a Christian prayer. So that is not in line with the findings and the decision of the Supreme Court. But it would be the height of naivety and disingenuousness to say that the issues that are put before us are weighed fairly, that we think about what they mean and we use our best judgment to make a decision. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. I think prayer is absolutely protected speech, but it cannot be state-sanctioned speech. It cannot be the Christian nationalist state coming down on one side and saying, this is the type of prayer that we're supporting to the exclusion of everybody else. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in support of Senator Breezy's bill. And I also want to thank Senator Breezy because he actually took action in reference to this prayer group where Mr. Hess had free access to all of our secure floors and was dropping off information to our staff, inviting them to the prayer group, which was highly inappropriate. I was really happy to see Senator Kavanaugh bring this up today. Earlier, I had sent Senator Arch, our speaker, an email. I think it's highly inappropriate to utilize staff on things like this. For those of you that are actually listening today, you'll know that there was a call to have Aaron register as a lobbyist because it's been said on this mic before. Senator Steve Erdman was one of them. He has praised Hess as a great encouragement and someone sent by God, has introduced a bill the past 2 years calling for the posting of the national motto, "In God We Trust," in prominent places in each school building. So we know that there is some influence when it comes to policy, but we also know that this is not a state-funded organization, but yet they utilize the Capitol. They utilize, apparently, Senator's staff and our email system. And although you can compare it to something like a constituent sending you an email, there is a big difference because this is a constant presence. And quite frankly, I've never asked to receive emails. I've asked that I not get the emails, but yet I continue to get emails. And not because I don't believe in God. I believe in God. But I think it's a bad message when we assume that everybody worships the same God. And with all due respect, we are all taxpayers. We are all Nebraskans. We should all have equal rights. But those are not the rights that we are addressing. What we are addressing is a demographic of how we see the world. And that's what we choose to support. And that's not good representation. So we know that that's indeed what he is doing. And they may very well be providing good Christian morals and values, is what your quote says, Senator Merman. And you don't feel that that's influencing legislation, and that's fine. But what are Christian morals and values? And why can't you do this outside of this building and without staff? If you want to pray, no one prevents you from praying. Senator Kavanaugh and I both pray in our own offices. We are both Catholic. When I have a hard day, I make sure I say the rosary. But I don't invite others to participate because that's between my faith and me. And so the fact that we are willing to do this in a way that everybody looks the other way is wrong. We're not saying shut it down. We're saying don't use state resources. You worship who and what you want to worship. I can respect that. But when you have to bring everybody into the fold, I cannot support that. And I will continue to be a noisemaker when it comes to utilizing state tax dollars, utilizing staff, utilizing space that tax dollars pay for so you can go and pray as a group. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I actually wasn't planning to speak on this measure that came before the Government Committee a few weeks ago, but I was intrigued by the trajectory that the debate carried on through after Senator Merman's unfortunate entree into the debate, wherein he utilized his powers and ability outside the scope of an appropriate or correct application of our rules to try and bully and try and silence other senators from conducting their due diligence. And I think that's disappointing and part of a pattern in practice as we've seen in this legislature over the last 30 days. So here we go again. So there is a incredibly long history in the Nebraska legislature, according to our traditions, norms, and customs, as the only deliberative body in the state of Nebraska to enjoy and appreciate and embrace a robust debate on a host of different topics impacting the state and impacting this legislature. To my friends, Senator Merman, Senator Erdman, and others involved in quickly calling the question or refusal to answer questions or trying to bully senators with inappropriate, out-of-order motions regarding germaneness in an attempt to strike things from the record, how ironic to have a big government solution grounded in silencing and censorship and bullying. The antidote for speech that you disagree with is more speech. It is not government censorship. It is not utilizing the power and privilege of your office in this institution to protect your egos or fragility from something that you don't want to hear, that's too painful to hear. If you don't want to hear it, you can organize your time in another way. If you don't want to go down that path, you can hit your light and talk about the measure as you see fit to debate. But there's nothing out of line or out of order as in our tradition, history, and custom to enjoy opportunity to have a robust discussion last week, which our rule traditions, or whether it's clumsy attempts to raise a question of germaneness and try and strike something from the record, which shows a lack of appreciation and understanding for the rules, which we unanimously adopted together. Whether it's senators, these same senators in committee denying my opportunity to ask other senators questions about their bills, whether it's senators coming before committees, throwing up their hands and saying, I'm too tired, I don't want to answer questions anymore. So here we go again with yet another unfortunate example, a pattern in practice by the tyranny of the majority to not just win, but to silence and to censor and to tear down the institution, this proud institution in its history at all costs. That, my friends, is scorched earth politics, and that place in the Nebraska legislature.
She's speaking directly to us in the second house. That's them raising red flags and saying, hey, this is not okay. This is happening and it's not okay. And we need the public to know so that the public can take action.
Do you want to give the audience a terse definition of what Christian nationalism is?
The idea of Christian nationalism is like Christian supremacy, where it's state-sanctioned religion, where instead of having members of the legislative body that are Christian, they actually put those Christian beliefs and quote unquote Christian values as they see them into the government and then force other people to live and follow them. In fact, Senator Merman even discussed, and this is stuff, I'm an atheist, and this is stuff that is terrifying to me. It's terrifying to me when they demonize me because I don't have a belief in God. I know it's used to weaponize against atheists a lot. This idea that because we don't have a deity, we don't have a value system. My argument is if you need a God to say, hey, don't go murder people, then you need to reevaluate how you're thinking because you should just know. But yeah, Senator Merman, got up and talked about how it was important to have that Christian value in the state house and that it was no wonder people were going out and committing these mass murders because they don't believe in God and they don't think that there's a consequence. It's the idea that it's the same as white nationalism. It's the idea that this is the best. Christian belief is the superior belief that everybody should follow. And it's believing that as a Christian values than you do. I'm a more moral person than you are. It's the belief that the Christian religion and generally the Christian religion that they believe in or the Christian values that they believe in are superior and should dictate life and law. And obviously that's incredibly terrifying, especially when you look at so many events in history around the world that Christian nationalism has led to death and violence. It's definitely concerning. It's definitely something that we want to heed the warnings of Senator Hunt and Conrad and Blood and Kavanaugh when they discuss these things. It is so inappropriate. So for me, this is the first time I'm hearing that they have a gentleman in there of the clergy that has access to all of these resources. This was the first I had heard about it. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying to me.
It's terrifying. And like you said, we shouldn't take lightly that it's being brought up on the floor and being put into record by these senators.
And it's Christian senators.
Yes.
Senator Hunt is not religious. She's an atheist. But Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Blood are both Catholic. And they're both, from my view, what I would call strong Catholics. They definitely believe their beliefs and have a faith in their God. And so I appreciate that they're putting their own in check, if you will. Hey, I'm a Christian too. You don't get to do this. I appreciate that.
It has a little more validity when it comes from someone who is person of faith to be sounding the alarms for sure. Is there anything else we should be paying attention to for this upcoming week?
So another one that we definitely want to pay attention to comes on Tuesday, and that's LB11. There's actually two bills in the Education Committee that we're looking at, LB811 and then LB528. That's in room 1525 at 1:30. LB528 is the Create the Nebraska Option Enrollment Tuition Account Program. We're opposing that. And then LB811 is the one I kind of want to focus on here a little bit. That's change provisions relating to the Student Discipline Act and provide for use of physical contact or physical restraint. Hey, listen, this bill is seriously so frustrating. I have been fighting this bill in the state legislature since I have been involved in the state legislature. This bill or some version of it is one of the first bills that really garnered my interest because they call it the Hit the Kids bill. And it's essentially just version after version of we're going to have staff in the schools. So we're not even talking about just teachers. We're talking about kitchen staff, janitors, any staff of the school can just train kids, and there's not training included. This is
Wow.
incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous policy to have, especially without training. I used to work in group homes for folks living with dual diagnoses of mental health illness along with developmental disabilities. And we were trained in restraints. When I first got into it, we were trained in floor restraints, and then those were proven to be too dangerous. But we moved over to a different style of restraint that people in the field might be familiar. They have these different trainings that police and everybody goes through. Anybody that is restraining anybody needs to go through training to know how to do this and how to do it safely. And that really just touches on the basics, right? Because we also know that this would be more harmful to disabled kids. It'd be more harmful to children of color. Those are the students that are more likely to be restrained. Oh my gosh, there's just so much wrong with it. There's so much wrong with it. And I got to be honest, at this point, I think the only reason they continue to introduce it is to make it sound bad because it gets deemed by the public. It's the Hit the Kids bill. It's the teachers and kids, right? Teachers don't want to do that. We have a lot of elderly teachers. We have a lot of teachers that wouldn't even physically be able to do this, along with they just don't want to because they're developing relationships with these children that they teach and care for. So even though that's not what it is, it brings over this perception of, oh my God, the schools want to put their hands on our kids, even though the teachers union is against it, the teachers are against it. This is not a bill being presented by teachers or public schools or the teachers union. This is just a bill that keeps getting handed off. It was originally placed by Senator Groney of North Platte, the one that ended up stepping down after getting caught taking pictures of his aide without permission. And it stemmed off of initially there was a teacher in North Platte that had drug a kid by his feet through the hallways. That teacher did not get fired, by the way. So Senator Groney started introducing this. Now, teachers in the student union will say some of the problems that you're saying do exist, but this isn't how we want to handle it. Like this bill at this point has so many people against it. It's like Ivy Black Girl, Arc of Nebraska, just about any advocacy group you can think of against this bill in every form it gets presented in. So I think that it started out from Garoni wanting to for dragging a kid by his feet down the hallways to now I think it gets utilized just make public schools look bad while they try to defund them and move your money over to private Christian schools. Yeah, so that's on Tuesday. And again, we will have to go back and fight this off. It's a really bad bill. It's bad this year, just like it's bad every year.
So we want to make sure that we have or try to have your comments in by Monday, February 27th at
no, at this, because they're closed on Monday.
Oh no.
But that's okay because at this point we just want to email the committee anyway. Email the education committee. Just email them and tell them not to move it of committee. Tell them that it's a harmful bill, that it's been brought for years and years now, and in every form, teachers and parents and disability advocates and kids for students of color, and they're all against it every year.
If you're against teachers hitting kids, now would be the time to speak up. Pretty simple.
Right. Yeah. You can't even expect teachers, even when it comes to safety. Sometimes you're in a situation where you might have to restrain a child for their safety or the imminent safety of others. I understand that. But those people have to be trained so that they are safe and so that the child is safe. And it should only be used in imminent cases of threat. If you don't restrain, somebody will without a doubt be harmed. In the past, a lot of times this type of thing has been used to protect property, right? You would maybe have a kid that was drawing on the table and then it escalates because the people around that child aren't appropriately trained in de-escalation and they aren't appropriately trained in restraint techniques. It escalates from the kid drawing on the table to a restraint where the child or the teacher is injured, or even if there's no physical injury, there's the relationship injury, right? From having to put your hands on that child. We don't want to be restraining kids and escalating this because they've drawn on a table, right? Very serious, but again, I want to reiterate, this is not something that the schools want. This is coming from the Republicans in the legislature. This is not something that schools want, but I think it's being used to demonize schools.
You can still make comments, but also email the committee, like you said, and you can find all that information on
legislativestudygroup.com.
I'll get it. Yep, on who to contact for that bill. And then, as a friendly reminder, both LB230, the voter suppression bill, and LB675, the bill that will limit the harms of additional voter ID requirement, are scheduled for a public hearing this Wednesday, which is March 1st. So don't forget, February only has 28 days. So make sure you try to get those comments at noon on Tuesday, February 8th, against LB230 and support LB675. Are there any events on the horizon that we should be paying attention to coming up?
Yep, definitely on March 8th, they have the lobby day for Planned Parenthood. So definitely show up for that, especially if you haven't participated at the legislature before. Lobby days by these organizations are great events for first timers because you have people there to hold your hand through it to help you understand the process. There's lots of educational pieces to it. Yeah. So get down there March 8th for lobby day with Planned Parenthood.
Awesome. Yeah, they do a great job on educating first-time civic engagers on ways that you can raise your voice and use it to push back against these draconian bills.
And then also the study group is looking at putting together some time. There's some kind of unofficial organizing going on right now to help stall things by heading down and being Senator Kavanaugh's guest. So if we get the opportunity, you go, we'll be able to watch floor session. We're going to see about working things out so that you can also be introduced as a guest of Senator Kavanaugh. What this does is when they introduce their guests, then they pause the session for a minute. The president announces the guest, and then the guest is recognized, and the legislature takes a minute to clap for them and whatever. But essentially what it does is it helps slow down the process and helps give Senator Kavanaugh a break, if even just for a minute, from talking and trying to hold up the process on these harmful anti-trans and anti-women, anti-femme, anti-human bills. Definitely check out the study group if you haven't yet. We have a group on Facebook that's all linked through our website, www.nelegislativestudygroup.com. There's also a yellow button on our homepage that'll link you to our resource sheet that will give you all the dates and times and the info for all the legislation that Leah and I have talked about here.
Yes, absolutely. Keep your eyes and ears peeled on the Nebraska Study Group Facebook page and their website for different events going on in the community and different events that they're hosting. Speaking of resources, I wanted to let you know I did update the Swing Left Nebraska resource page. So now you'll be able to find Nebraska abortion resources, national abortion resources, as well as national and LGBTQIA plus resources on that page as well. It's done in a Word doc, so you can click on the links, but you can also, if you have access to a computer, you can print it off and have it handy with you for yourself or to hand out.
Awesome. And then I have one final thought that I want to make sure that you put into the podcast.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just want to say, Leah, that I think that what you're doing here is really awesome. I think that the Swing Left podcast and all of the work that you do around it is awesome. And I know that it takes a lot of time and effort. And I really appreciate being able to be a part of it and the work that you put on and helping get this information out, because it is super important to get out and educate the public on what's happening. And you're a huge part of this. And I want to say for myself, but I'm sure for the listeners, how much we appreciate you and the podcast and everything that you're doing for Nebraska right now.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the appreciation, and I could not do it without your help and your support. And we couldn't do it without our listeners, you guys who take the time out of your day to listen to us and to get educated, and then to use the information that we're sharing with you to share with other people really makes a difference. It's a ripple effect. The impact that we can have in just conversations that we have with our friends, family, the coworkers that we know are safe people. We know who those are. Each conversation makes a difference. You never know how that conversation is going to impact someone and activate them. It started with a conversation with me, and I'm sure it started with a conversation with you as well. So this is why we're here, is to have a conversation for you to tap into and listen to and hopefully learn from. So thank you for everybody's time to make this possible. And Angie, thank you so much for your time, because without you, we wouldn't be able to unpack the Unicameral. It is our goal here to open up a dialogue and make an impact in our community. We want to inspire change and bring a positive outlook to Nebraska. That's why we need your help. If you enjoyed the show, we'd be so thankful if you could take a few minutes to rate and subscribe. It's through your support that we can continue to bring meaningful conversations and ideas into our lives. Let's work together to create positive change. When we open our minds and listen to each other, we can truly spark progress and make the world a better place. Let's take this journey together, and together we can make progress. Thank you for your support. Let's mobilize. Let's take action. Let's go.
Ready, set, go. Get ready to go.